Hi and welcome back. I'm Scott Syverson, your host for this video. Today we'll be talking about the science behind the Paradaptive Intelligence Network. You're probably saying to yourself, sure, this Paradaptive Intelligence Network, very interesting, but really does it work? What's the science behind it and can I trust it? We're going to try and answer that today in this video. Paradaptive intelligence is a theory. Like all theories, such as Einstein's theory of special relativity, Darwin's theory of evolution, the theory of electromagnetism, which went into the engineering of the camera and the microphone that you're listening to me, they're all theories. And any theory can be disproven at any point in time with the introduction or discovery of new information. But the prime value of a theory is in its predictive ability, allowing you to take proactive steps and manipulate certain aspects of your environment with a predictable result. And that's what Paradaptive Intelligence allows you to do. Theories string together known facts in a way that explains the relationships and cause and effect between these known facts. And that's exactly what Paradaptive Intelligence does as a theory. If you know anything about how theories work in science and how they're introduced, it's a very slow process. Many of you might be surprised to know that when Einstein came out with his theory of special relativity, it was not widely accepted. In fact, it was not accepted at all. He had to tour the world for several years speaking to scientists, informing them how it worked. And still it was a long process before that theory came into fruition. And there's a good reason for that, and it's a good reason why scientists are skeptical. Most of the scientists in the world have made their bones, their chops, their reputation by extending what is known about the current models, what they were taught when they went to school. New theories that come along and rock the boat or introduce new elements or come from a completely different vector, as Paradaptive Intelligence does, is unfamiliar to them and, in their eyes, unsupported. And this is a good thing to a certain extent, as long as it doesn't become dogmatic. Making a theory prove itself over time and in its predictability is how new models, new theories are accepted and old models are discarded. But again, remember, it's a very long process. And we just recently introduced Paradaptive Intelligence. I just published the book last year. So in that standpoint, we're very young in the infancy of this model. This puts you on the cutting edge, the leading edge of science. It'll be up to you as practitioners out in the field to determine whether this model works or doesn't work. Now, I have my confidence because for 5 years that it took me to write this book and present this model to you, I tried to figure out every way that I could break it, every way that it doesn't work. And to date, I haven't been able to figure out any flaws in it. Now, let me say this. No one ever gets a model right on the first run. Not any of the big names in science that I just mentioned. They all had things that they missed in their model. And I'm sure I've missed something, but I don't know what it is. And only time will tell as you implement it in the field. And it will allow others to create theorems and maxims to fix those flaws, to improve the model and its accuracy and its predictability. And that's something I look forward to seeing in the future. What is especially terrifying in the field of science are grand unifying theories. These are taking in completely new approaches to things that people thought they understood. Paradaptive intelligence is a grand unifying theory. There are many scientists that believe a grand unifying theory, something on the scope of what I've presented in the Paradaptive Intelligence model, can exist, that they need to be small and cover a very small slice. Unfortunately, I'm not willing to go that route, and I don't think you'll be once you fully understand and implement this new science as you go about your sales careers. The model describes a biological system that is in place that controls all behavior of humans. Yes, that is a broad model, but the actual mechanisms we describe have been described in smaller studies and smaller experiments, and what we've done is string them together in a new way and a new purpose and a new meaning, looking at human behavior as a biological feedback system. And that's what's so radical about what I've been presenting to you. And I'll get to more of that in just a second. But let me start by telling you how the Paradaptive Intelligence model came about. This started off as research at the University of Washington in Seattle by a researcher by the name of Katherine Peil. The impetus of what drove this research was that she was looking, as a psychology researcher, was looking for a new model to describe and identify and diagnose mental illness. But she took a radical approach, and this was going to be, I believe in the early 80s, late 70s. The radical approach that she took was to describe what the brain should be doing in order to be able to identify the deviations away from what it should be doing. No one had ever approached psychology that way, and no one had ever attempted it until Peil. And no one was successful until Peil, leading to her model and my model based upon her work. In short, what she was trying to describe was the architecture of the brain, what its function was, how it went about doing and performing those functions, and what its purposes and drives were. What was it trying to do? And again, this was a radical concept and is still very new to science at this point, some 30 years later. So how did I become involved with this? Well, I was doing my second MBA program at Washington State University. A professor had said in one lecture that our best predictive model of consumer behavior could only predict 38% of consumer behavior. Let me explain that a little bit. The best model, using a dozen variables in a multi-variable regression, could only explain 38% of why people were doing what they were doing. So that meant 62% was left unexplained. We had no idea what they were doing. Well, I had been involved doing new product development for some very major corporations at that time, and was very heavily involved in marketing research, which is highly akin to research, period. We all use the same methodologies in analysis of trying to figure out where markets and consumer behavior is going. And I thought, well, gosh, we've got to be doing something wrong. Statistics has been something I've been very good at in helping solve my problems in terms of product design and implementation programs and things of that nature. So I was arrogant and stupid enough thinking that I could solve this problem if I just applied myself. So I went about looking at all the psychological models that were out there and trying to evaluate them. I even approached some of my professors to see if they would be interested in joining me in this research, and I couldn't get any takers because no one really wanted to step out of their comfort zones of their specialities and start looking into psychology applied to consumer behavior. At that time, cross-discipline research was still kind of on the horizon, hadn't really permeated science. So I continued to try and determine how we could take a different approach at looking at consumer behavior. By sheer chance, one day, I just happened to run into a lady and I started chatting with her. And about within 5 minutes, she started telling me about the research that she was doing, and I started telling her about my research. 5 more minutes into this conversation, Katherine Peil and I discovered that we were actually talking about the same things from completely different perspectives. I was talking about it from consumer behavior, and she was talking about diagnostics for mental health. We both realized that what we really were talking about was the adaptational circuitry, which is the primary function of the brain. Shortly thereafter, we exchanged our research and where we were going and our thoughts and whatnot. We formed a research company called EFS International LLC in Washington State to further her research, because I felt that this had really had the potential to really explain what consumers did and why they did it. And as it turned out, I was exactly right. Katherine Peil was the president and I was the vice president. And that was some 24 years ago. And over that time, about 5 years ago, I started to write my book, Paradaptive Intelligence, Sales Psychology 101, wanting to take what we knew about the science of how the brain processes decisions and bring it to the business field. And that was always my interest in this research, which was to take that science, that raw science that she was developing, and learn to use it in the business field. we were at that stage where I felt that I could go, and I had understood it and dissected it enough to understand applications of this new science in the business world. So I started writing my book. Well, about 2 years into that, Katherine Peil finally published her research in a peer-reviewed, and that's key, a peer-reviewed medical journal that was published in 3 languages. That journal was called Advances in Health and Science, and it was published in March of 2014. Because Paradaptive Intelligence was radical and it looked at psychological behavior as a function, as an output, an outcome of biological processes. It combined psychology and biology. And no one had ever really taken that step and linked those 2 things together. So finding peers was rather difficult because there was nobody in the world that was looking at this other than Katherine Peil and myself as her partner in Emotional Feedback Systems International, which is what EFS stands for. She dubbed her model EFS, Emotional Feedback Systems. Remember in the last video, in the prior, we talked about each emotion as a comparative engine. It's comparing the information being presented at the moment to something that is in your memory banks as a basis to be compared to in the past to see if it's going to satisfy that emotion. So that's the way you need to look at EFS, the Emotional Feedback System, the base unit of research, published research, which everything I presented to you is based upon. Okay, that brings up another question. Well, what is the difference between EFS and Paradaptive Intelligence? If you go back to the first videos where I describe the 6 fundamental elements, units that are in the system and how they work together, EFS comprises 5 of them. The one that is not part of the original EFS research was the Mirror Neuron System. In order to make this raw science usable to businessmen, I wanted to talk and use methodology and descriptions to allow them to understand the face-to-face communication that they're in every day, especially as salespeople. You're calling on other people. And EFS was a very narrow model and did not address a lot of that personal interaction, which is why I added on to my model, the Paradaptive Intelligence, the Mirror Neuron System aspect of interperson communication. So that's how we get to the Paradaptive model. It's the EFS model plus the Mirror Neuron System combined to make the Paradaptive Intelligence model. My role in the EFS International was always to be the application of the research to business. That was my passion, and that remains my passion, is business. So being able to take raw research, and those involved in raw research know generally which gets published is not immediately applicable. It requires someone to engineer that. So Katherine Peil has been the research scientist, and I have been the application engineer, taking that raw science and making it usable for you and all of business. So in a roundabout, odd kind of way, that's how an MBA ended up becoming a specialist and an expert in emotions as adaptive engines and consumer behavior. And one would think that that would be way out of the field, but when you've been at it for 24 years and looking at science on this over that time span, and we were also the first ones in that field, there was really no one else that was pursuing this. Just like when you're the first person to market with a product, those generally capture the market. Well, we could say that about a business guy too. So we've talked a little bit about predictability, how models need to have predictability. What is the predictability? What can we expect from the Paradaptive Intelligence model? It is an incredibly powerful model. It is incredibly accurate. That's why I was very comfortable writing the book and sticking my name on the cover. It has the ability to predict 100% of the time across 98% of the population, and by that I mean the Earth's population, how they're going to process a buying decision. The missing 2% comes from those that have mental defects. And the 2% that I chose to exclude in this model, there are many defects, but they're all going to think that way, with the exception of one group, and that's psychopaths. Psychopaths are born without one of the corrective emotions. They're born without the emotion for disgust. Disgust is the primary mechanism that keeps societies in order. You follow their norms or you get embarrassed. That's a form of disgust. You feel shame when you do things against the rules. Again, that's disgust. Every time I look at a new science, I find all sorts of elements of paradaptive intelligence embedded in the foundations of those sciences. They've been looking at it for a long time. No one has put it together until now, until the paradaptive intelligence. And that's what's so exciting about this and what should make you excited too. So you do need to buy my book, Sales Psychology 101, Paradaptive Intelligence, the grand unifying theory of adaptation, consumer behavior, and sales. Thank you.